The corpse teleporter. The teleporter had been developed less than a year ago, using technology the detective did not understand. All she understood was how to use it. You put a sample of someone's DNA into the small chamber at the top, type the name into the console, press the button, and the person requested would appear in the large tube-shaped chamber at the bottom. There was only one snag. It could not teleport living people, only corpses. The detective thought it was better this way. As a child, she had read sci-fi stories of teleporters gone wrong, people being split into pieces, teleported into solid objects, fused together. She dreaded to think what would happen if it could happen to a living person. While it couldn't be used to rescue people, the machine proved useful in recovery efforts and murder investigations where the location of the body was unknown. However, there was no guarantee that the corpse would not arrive intact, and there were a few horror stories. The technician had heard of an incident where the teleporter had retrieved a pile of slop that burned the technician's hand when he accidentally touched it. Turns out, the poor lad had been dissolved in acid. The cleanup and repair took weeks, and the technician's recovery took longer. The detective skimmed over the case file. Elise Alson went missing 30 years ago at age 17. Reported a stalker to the police multiple times before her disappearance, but was dismissed. In the weeks following the incident, her parents received gruesome packages in the mail. First some severed legs, then arms, teeth, ears, tongue, eyes. Recent DNA tests confirmed they belonged to Elise. The detective placed a hair sample onto the chamber at the top, entered Elise's name, and pressed the button. A message popped up on the screen. Shocked, the detective tried again. Same result. She tried over and over, pounding and shaking the machine, begging it to give her a different answer. The same message appeared. Error. Target not deceased. What Timmy saw. Timmy had had a hard life in his short 3 years. His father was a cruel man who blamed the world for his problems and took out his anger on those around him. His mother, Mary, had been too often the target of that anger, but when his father directed the anger at Timmy, Mary knew she had to leave. So one night, she took Timmy and disappeared without a trace. Eventually, after weeks in shelters, she found a job at an old hotel that boarded her and Timmy in exchange for help looking after the place. But Timmy still hasn't started talking. Mary was concerned, but the doctor said there was nothing wrong and Timmy would talk when he was ready. So Mary spent time with him every day, making sure he felt loved and safe. She'd hold him and read to him and teach him words like mommy and home and sky and friend. He still didn't talk, but at times he'd smile at her or look off in the distance and point and laugh, so she was content. One night, Mary awoke to the sound of someone trying to open the door. She figured it was just a guest who had the wrong room. But then she heard a crash and was immediately awake. She grabbed Timmy and ran into the bathroom. There she locked the door, hid under the bathroom counter, and prayed. Minutes went by, And then Mary heard the voice she'd prayed never to hear again. Mary, Mary, I know you're in there. Mary gripped Timmy tightly and prayed her husband could not enter. And for a moment, she thought her prayers were answered. Then she heard a crack and the door caved in, and the man who haunted her nightmares stood before her. Mary was desperate to protect Timmy, but she'd never been able to stop her husband before, and knew she couldn't now. Please, don't hurt our son, she begged with tears in her eyes. This is what you deserve, whore. Mary backed away, but she hit the rear of the bathroom and had nowhere else to go. She closed her eyes and prayed to God and St. Nicholas to protect her son. Suddenly, Mary heard a strange noise and opened her eyes to the sight of her husband floating in midair, clutching desperately at his neck. As he struggled, a panicked look came over his face, and his body twisted and began to fold in on itself. Limb by limb, he jerked and contorted until the last of him disappeared into nothingness, leaving only the fading echo of his screams. Shocked, Mary stared at the empty space where her tormentor had been. She saw the air shimmering faintly. Disbelieving, she looked down at her son, pointed at her excitedly. "Mommy," he said, the first word he had ever spoken. Then he pointed at the space above where his father had been. "Friend," Timmy said, and smiled. Murder House. Blood splattered against the second-story window. She screamed. Jake grabbed her shoulders. "Careful, Gina girl. Screamers die first." Liz rolled her eyes, taking another drag from her cigarette. "Don't be an ass." Smoke faded into the winds, nipping at the people standing in line. "Who am I kidding?" She pulled him off Gina. "I expect too much of you." Liz kissed him. Gina, sheltered, preppy, popular, had never been to a haunted house. Her other friends wouldn't approve, so she had to beg Liz. Liz didn't care what people thought. She admired that. Another person ran out of the house screaming. Must be good, Jake thought. He chugged his beer, crushed the can, and chucked it as they reached the entrance. "It's party time, ladies." Gina was disgusted that she found them so hot. Heavy doors slammed behind them, shutting out soft moonlight, plunging them into straight darkness. "Boo!" Gina screamed again as Jake cackled. Liz slapped him, making him laugh harder. The cycle repeated with every horror inside the house. Skeleton stalkers, Gina freaked. Zombie butlers, Jake teased. Murder clowns, Liz scolded. The bloodied clowns were dancing around them, toying knives dull against the strobe lights. "Guys, this blood looks, like, really real." Gina made a scared little duck face for Jake. "Aw, look." Jake tickled her. "Princess is scared." No. Gina pretended to fight back between giggle fits. Give it a rest. Liz wasn't into labels, so she told herself. He gave Liz his famous sexy stare. "Come on, baby." Motioning like he had been stabbed dramatically, he said, You know I'm dying to be with you. Liz tried not to smile. You're dumb. She pushed him into the clowns. Something glinted. Jake clutched his back, stumbled at the girls. Help. Ha ha. Liz put her hands on her hips. We're very scared. Jake tried steadying himself on the woman. I'm not. He left sticky red trails on their clothes as he collapsed. Jake? Liz said. The clown skittered away. Liz checked Jake's pulse. Nothing. Holy crap, we have got to get out. Gina stared. So, this was real fear. Something so wrong, she couldn't scream. Liz yanked her into action. We have to go now. They bolted back the way they'd come. Another glint. Pain flashed across Gina's heel as she fell. A clown giggled. Skeletons and zombies emerged from the dark. Liz peeled Gina off the floor, narrowly avoiding gnashing teeth. Get up. But they moved slowly, though the exit was in sight. The killers were closer, knives raised, teeth snarling, bones chattering. Gina knew what she had to do. She unlooped herself from Liz. At least one of them should make it out. What the hell do you think you're... Gina shoved Liz into the crowd of murderers. They fell upon her like sharks to chum. Stumbling out into the moonlight, Gina limped past the line of oblivious thrill-seekers, desperately pushing down the image in her mind. The look of betrayal that would haunt the rest of her days. Mother. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a young lady. Yes, with her long legs, and her soft, fine hair, and her glistening, glimmering eyes. She was the finest lady in town. She longed more than anything in the world to be a mother. She wanted it more than she wanted to eat. She wanted it more than she wanted to breathe. I want little ones of my own, she cried, but nobody will marry me. Alas, fate is cruel to the kindest of souls. The young lady lived amongst folk who despised her. Brutal, blighted, bestial folk. They gasped when they saw her. They grew violent when they saw her. She was soon banished to a cave where nobody would lay eyes upon her. What cruel, cruel fate. If they bestowed such appalling treatment upon such a beautiful lady, how would they treat their own disgusting little children? The children may be wrinkled and soggy, but as a future mother, she knew that all children must be loved no matter what they look like. The folk did not love their offspring. It was obvious. The little ones shrieked and screamed from dawn till dusk. No loved child screams like that. Of course, there's only one thing to do. Love those poor children herself. When they grew to be bigger and uglier, she could let them back to their neglectful parents. At least by then, she knew they could care for themselves. And better than that, they'd never forget her. She'd have all the children she ever dreamed of. All she had to do was show them the true unconditional adoration of a mother. Come, my little ones, she whispered to the children lost in the depths of the forest. Come. Let me tell you a story. Weaving webs with her words, She drew them in. With an intoxicating but deliberately delicate touch, they soon grew quiet, and their eyes grew wide. Soon, she had many children. So many children. And for the first time in a long time, she was happy. Children sat betwixt her spindly legs, swaddled in blankets of the finest silk. Her many eyes welled with tears of joy when she looked at all the children she had saved. Their small hands felt warm on the fine hairs on her backside, but it wasn't enough. If I am to be honest, I don't think I'll ever have enough. But that's beside the point now, isn't it? It's getting late, my little one. Let me give you a kiss. Mind not the tickle behind your ear. It is the makings of a fine silk blanket. You will be warm tonight. Come, my child. Let me tell you a story. One last look. Where is he? A firm, calm voice echoed outside the hospital ward. A woman in a suit hurried in, capturing everyone's attention. She was a well-known figure in the city, but it was a rare sight to see her so flustered and red-faced. Guided by a nurse, she passed by me and stopped at a bed shielded by pink curtains, taking a deep breath. The nurse drew back the curtain, revealing a man lying there, his heart monitor displaying a faint but steady beat. The woman, now composed, managed a small smile. She sat down by the bed, gently holding the man's hand, her other hand softly caressing his forehead. I recalled hearing that he had been struck by a falling air conditioner, leaving him in a coma for over a month. His condition was critical. It seems his time is almost up, remarked Henry, who had just woken up from his 8th chemotherapy session for brain cancer. His bald head stood out in the ward. 73-year-old Henry, estranged from his family for many years, had become sharp-tongued and sarcastic, resembling a mischievous old child. Hey, it's not nice to say that in front of family, I softly chided, patting the patient record in my hand. He shrugged, returning to his newspaper. I looked back at the woman, still firmly holding the man's weak hand, her eyes reflecting strong resolve, fitting her powerful reputation. My heart trembled. After years of witnessing life's end and the cries of anguish in the hospital, I often found myself most moved by those facing death with such strength. Was their fortitude genuine or a facade? Or perhaps they simply saw death as a release, or felt nothing at all. I didn't know. Maybe she's behind it, Henry's voice came from behind. That might be possible. A doctor approached the woman, speaking softly about the patient's condition. She showed little emotion, nodding occasionally. Her resolve remained strong. It was evident in her eyes. Suddenly, the heart monitor beeped. Its line, now flat. The doctor closed the curtain. I glanced at my watch and turned to Henry. Time to go, I said. Henry closed his eyes. A translucent figure emerged from his body and moved toward me. Do you want one last look? I asked. What for? It's so ugly, he retorted, glaring at me. A man emerged from behind the curtain, confused. I waved at him. "Welcome, Mr. Johnson. I'm the hospital's Afterlife guide, responsible for leading you and Mr. Thompson here to the Afterlife registration office. Is there anything you would like to do before we leave?" "I want to see her one last time," he said, his face ashen. I nodded. As the curtain reopened, the woman's strong resolve had vanished. Her eyes, looking at her husband's lifeless body, were filled with disdain. Her mouth curved into a mysterious smile. Mr. Johnson stared, a flash of shock, then realization crossing his face. He turned to me, his eyes resolute. In that moment, I felt I understood something. There's a serial killer in our neighborhood. The body of Vicky Fisher, a 27-year-old salesperson reported missing on 23 November, was found on the beach. You're watching the news again. Don't you get upset by this? Coming out of the kitchen with a nice mug of hot chocolate, my husband glanced at the TV. I do, but it's better to stay tuned, I sighed, holding the remote tightly. The remains of Helen Smith, the 27-year-old housewife reported missing by her family, was washed up on the shore. It's unsettling to have such incidents in a small town. He sat next to me, wrapping his arm around my shoulder. How long do you think it will take for the police to solve the case? No idea. I just hope I can return home safely after going out. The police don't seem to have any clues. James Jones, a 26-year-old teacher at a local elementary school, was found dead in his apartment. The cause of death was a penetrating injury. Well, even after returning home, you can still be at risk. He dropped the line casually, as if that's something light to say. What do you mean? That's creepy. I turned to him, still frowning. Well, the news just said the guy was murdered in his flat, he quickly replied. I didn't mean to upset you. I just want you to be alert, you see. The victims are all at the similar age as you. They even went to the same high school as you. That's not a nice thing to say. You know I get anxious easily. I stared at him, making direct eye contact, trying to figure out the potential underlying meaning of his words. Sorry, babe. I just want you to be safe. He apologized again, trying to give me a kiss, but I dodged. I appreciate your kind intention, but please, don't say anything like this ever again. Richard Young, a 27-year-old street cleaner, was reported missing since 30 October. He sighed. I'm sorry. I won't say that again. And why don't we get to bed a bit early tonight? You're stressed, probably because of these missing and murder news recently. I can feel his love and sincerity through his eyes, just like when he proposed to me. After a brief silence, I decided to trust him. Yeah, you're right. I've been a bit jumpy lately. How about I clean up the dishes and you go prepare our room? As he grinned and kissed me, I took his mug and headed towards the kitchen. He's right. The victims all had common backgrounds with me. It's just a matter of time before the police realize this and narrow down the suspects. Though I'm sure he's not aware of the truth, I should be careful around him too. So, before him, Maybe I should target someone else unrelated first. The Seaweed Dilemma. I had just been accepted to the University of Wisconsin-Madison when my father sat me down and told me that going to college was a huge mistake. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps and become a residential property manager, which is the fancy term he made up for landlord. There's no money in botany, he said. Besides, studying flowers is for sissies. I told him botany was my passion, and his response was, "Your mom dying made you soft." My resentment towards him is what pushed me to become a brilliant botanist. In the end, it turns out I made the right decision. The world didn't end overnight. The signs were there early on, but it took years for the United States to collapse. Mostly because people didn't believe the pandemic was as bad as it really was. While this was unfolding, I applied to every underground shelter I could find. Over a dozen responded, begging me to lead their agriculture department, but I chose the shelter that allowed me to bring a +1. My father. Turns out, the apocalypse didn't have any use for landlords. Yes, I partially did it out of spite, but I also wanted my father to be proud of me. I wanted him to see how difficult my work was. I was given a very limited amount of farm space and water. I had to meticulously plan every crop in exact amounts so that the shelter could survive indefinitely on practically nothing but veggies. My crops were working too. None of us had left the safety of the shelter for years. As far as we knew, there was no world left to return to. Then disaster struck, years into the apocalypse. Someone had sabotaged our seaweed tank. Of all the crops to destroy, they picked the single most important one. I called for an emergency meeting, demanding every member of the shelter attend. I explained to the shelter what I found, and how our seaweed harvests had been permanently destroyed. The nori we made from drying the seaweed was the only source of vitamin B12 in our diets. Without any more seaweed, we'd probably make it about a year. Then we'd all suffer nerve damage, and after that, heart failure. I begged everyone in the room, if you know who did this, come forward. I waited for my father to admit to it. I was sure he did this as revenge for defying him all those years ago. Instead, a 7-year-old started crying. I recognized her as one of my assistant's daughters. She said she was tired of eating seaweed, that she hated it, so she ruined the tank, not knowing its importance. Everybody hung their heads in silence, wondering if this was the end. My dad was the first to speak up. "Son, you are so damn smart. There has to be another way to survive." Unfortunately, there was. Our shelter possessed something that was very high in vitamin B12. Organ meat, hearts, livers, kidneys. Hit and run for your life. I was making my way back home from work when I came across a parked car on the side of the road. The road I was on is filled with a lot of blind corners, and locals know that the posted speed limit is 15 or 20 miles an hour too fast. Even though the locals are aware of this, every year plenty of people die when driving too close to the shoulder and falling down steep hills that are just riddled with trees and rocks. So when I came across this other vehicle, I felt the impact of the crash before seeing the car. It was my first car accident, and I was terrified. While I was fine, I had to check on the other driver. After getting out of the car and getting a better look at the other vehicle, I could see that it was far from working condition. Its rear driver's side tire was bent sideways, the rear bumper was smashed, and the trunk had flown open. I was in the middle of apologizing to the driver, who was slowly getting out of the car and holding his head, when I noticed that inside of the trunk was a blood-soaked corpse wrapped up in plastic and duct tape. For what seemed like an eternity, I was frozen with uncertainty. By the time I decided to flee from the scene of an accident, the man regained his senses and was running around to my driver's side door, trying to open it as I sped away. In my rearview mirror, I see him getting into his car to chase me. I knew his car wasn't in any condition to drive, but that didn't mean for me to slow down. Back at home, I parked in my garage and tried to come up with another explanation of what I saw in the man's trunk, but I couldn't think of anything other than an out-of-season Halloween decoration. When my breathing and heartbeat returned to normal, I decided to go into the house and think about my options as I got drunk from the whiskey bottle that I kept in the cupboard above the fridge. Somehow, I didn't feel that telling the police was a good idea because I ran from the scene of a crime. As I made my way into the house, I inspected the damage of my vehicle. What I saw made my heart jump. My bumper was gone, and with it, my license plate. It must have fallen off when I hit the other car, and if that murderer has it, he can find out where I live.